Thanks everybody who's joining, but I will leave it off to Chris to kind of run the show from this point.
Great, Josh, appreciate that. And if you guys are, I don't know, it doesn't look like I have access. If this is something you want to record for any parties not being able to join or for further reference, we're okay with that. But whichever works best for the team is fine. But we'll get started, and thank you for everybody on the line here. My name is Chris Dornan. I am a marketing manager within the software control business at Rockwell, based out of the Mayfield Heights, which is basically Cleveland office. But as we'll talk about the effects of the pandemic in terms of providing a solution to that, I'm working at home, obviously, and I live on the west side of Cleveland. But as we're talking to some of the gentlemen ahead of the call, I'm a Western Pennsylvania native, and I know sometimes people think that the state's completely different, west, east a bit sometimes. You're either bleed black and gold or green and silver, right? So hopefully I don't make anybody upset to let them know I bleed black and gold. My dad's from the Pittsburgh area. So that being said, happy to take some time to talk to you today. I am not by myself. I'm lucky to have two. So together, 3 of the 6 names here will be with this discussion today, presenting to you. The list here that you see is all of the content developers as part of this message. But I'm going to let Tom introduce himself to the team.
Thanks, Chris. This is Tom Jordan. I'm the marketing lead for Thin Manager. We are one of the software acquisitions that took place back in 2016 and based in Alpharetta, Georgia.
Thanks, Tom. And I'm going to let Joe go next, and Joe's going to start us through the presentation.
Okay, thanks. Okay, just a quick sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Yep. Can you hear us back okay, Joe?
Yeah, we're just fine. Thank you. Okay, again, Joe Geigel, marketing manager for HMI. Just for all practical purposes, HMI includes industrial computers and all of our panel view graphic interface type terminals. With that, let's get started. So as Chris alluded to at the beginning, we're going to have kind of an interesting discussion here, maybe a little bit different than you've ever encountered from a Rockwell marketing group before. We're going to talk more in terms of the world at large today and some of the things that we're seeing that are happening at our customer locations. A lot of that is tied to COVID. And we're going to talk about some of the difficulties that our customers are facing and how we may be able to help with some of our technology. We'll talk about the human side of things, and we'll tie it all together at the end. So if we look at what we've gone through over the last year or so, it's really been an interesting period in our lives. You know, I don't know that we've seen a lot of new trends out in industry, but certainly a lot of the pre-existing trends have been accelerated. And I'm really talking about things that maybe are more indirectly tied to automation than they are directly tied. So for instance, if you look at the workforce, veteran employees have really been retiring at much higher rates. And all of these things create turnover, disruptions, and it leaves us with a workforce in a lot of situations that maybe isn't quite as well trained as we'd like. Now, on top of that, data breaches have created heightened awareness of the need for security. And I know you might say, well, what does a data breach have to do with COVID? Well, again, it's kind of tied to that whole theme of, you know, with people leaving the workforce, retiring early, having great amounts of turnover, a lot of temporary workers. All these things mean that you have a workforce in a lot of cases that isn't quite as familiar with the security procedures that they should be following. So what we're trying to do is work with our technology to make the security processes and procedures easier for the workforce. And we all know that there's a greater emphasis on worker safety. We all know that we want our workers to stay 6 feet apart. We want to keep our equipment clean so it isn't prone to transmit COVID. All those types of things that maybe we didn't really pay as much attention to in the past to become more important. And then last, if we look at our end users, the folks out on that plant floor every day, a lot of them have had to deal with all sorts of uncertainty, you know, part shortages, labor shortages, changes in demand that change rapidly means that they need to have really flexible and agile operations so they can make these changes really easily and on the fly. And we know all of you have stories that you'd like to talk about, and at the end we'll have some time. So at that time, feel free to kind of bring up some of the things you've been seeing as well.
And Joe's going to go through a little bit of a history lesson to help as well, but I did see a quick note, and this always helps because we're going to talk about working virtually and the support for such. I didn't realize in Zoom that there is both a chat and a Q&A function. So Josh, thanks for making note of that because I wouldn't have seen it. So there is, based on chat versus Q&A, there is some specific functions with Zoom here that you can take advantage of as necessary. And sorry to interrupt you there, Joe. I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks. So anyway, I thought what we do is just kind of go over real quickly a brief history of products that we've seen from a hardware perspective. So in the 1990s, from a graphical terminal interface perspective, we brought out the PanaView family of products. PanaView 1200 was the first set of products. And believe it or not, yes, I'm old enough to have actually been in that group that worked on developing the PanaView 1200. And then as we move forward, we had quite a number of generations of product: PanaView Standard, PanaView Plus, PanaView Plus 6. And PanaView Plus 6 is being retired for the most part this year. PanaView Plus 7, MobileView, and PanaView 5000 are all of the active products that still have a very long life in front of us. And we'll talk about specific things that they can do for you to help you in this COVID world. Now, if you look at it from an industrial PC perspective, we started out with the 6000 family, and then in the 2000s, we brought out VersaView, the 6181 PC family. And then the more modern platforms that we have today are the VersaView 5000 and VersaView 6300. Now, a lot of people ask, well, are the 5000 and 6300 just different generations of that earlier VersaView family? And the answer is no, they're not. These are actually new generations of product that we brought out. And really, the only thing they have in common with that earlier VersaView family is the name. We actually discontinued the name VersaView for a few years, but it was so popular, many of our customers just kept calling them VersaViews that we said, well, if our customers want to call it VersaView, we'll just call it VersaView as well. So that's where we're at today. Now, if you look at this from, let's say a sort of a size perspective, size of system, we start out at the machine level. And at the machine level, we would typically see our PanaView graphic interface terminals with Factory Talk View Machine Edition software or Studio 5000 View Designer. But as you go upscale, you start incorporating industrial PCs. And at that point, you might also see us incorporate things like Thin Manager software. And then certainly when you get all the way to the very large systems, the distributed control systems, you're talking about Plan PAX, and you're absolutely going to be talking about Thin Manager software at that point. I know some of you are saying, well, what is Thin Manager? What's he talking about? I won't get into that today. Let's just say that Thin Manager provides the centralized content solutions for any type of application. And Tom Jordan is going to be the one that will give you a great amount of detail on this and all of the very nice things it can do to help you out in this COVID world.
Thanks for that again, Joe, for leading off there. And again, this leads back into the agenda, but we're going to talk in the collection of our portfolios and how they address the need for operations to be flexible and scalable. I think we'd all agree that we're living in a day where the technology does help us deal with the unique challenges of a pandemic, more so than maybe we thought we would be in years past. There are certain aspects of that technology we'll talk about, and that impact of that technology on how we address the human side of things, knowing that we work best when we feel safe. And at the end of the day, we as a control system vendor have to provide the right information in the right context to have people make the best decisions. So when we look at the new normal, at least from an operator standpoint, and a lot of us, as we talked about working remote, is that challenge of working remotely is the new normal. And I think regardless of COVID, and as we come to the other side of it, hopefully still, that we're going to see a change where there's going to be a much more prevalence of working remotely. So that in itself brings up challenges such as having IT support when we used to know where those folks and those specialists were. So how do we get help today and troubleshooting issues when they occur? Talked about the fact of, and Joe had mentioned this, about maybe some of the internal protections that are needed, from internal threats. And that's a lot of times what IT is authorized for. They want to get us the help we need to get access to the system, but they have to do that at the same time authorizing the right interaction with the system to the right user. But at the end of the day, for work to be done, Operators have to continue to be able to access the system, be able to understand what's happening in the production, be able to have access to alarms, to acknowledge them, to acknowledge batch prompts, et cetera. And a lot of times now that can't just be done by going back to the control room in a fixed location. You know, how do we enable that remote access as needed? And I think when Joe talks about some of the portfolio pieces here, let's look explicitly about aspects of the portfolio built for remote connectivity.
So when you look at remote connectivity, and again, there's a lot of reasons that you want to use that today. So the question you have to ask yourself is, what is it I want to do with my remote connectivity? Now, most people think of it in terms of taking a tablet, a laptop, or a cell phone and tapping into their system so that they can see what the HMI is seeing. So at the basic level, we have VNC access. And VNC access is something that's available in a variety of our products. It's available on PanaView 5000, PanaView Plus 7, and most of our industrial computers when you're using FactoryTalk View ME. But the idea behind this is that you can basically tap into what the operator is seeing. And you can also, if you want to, set it up so that you can actually take control. But whatever you see, the operator sees, and whatever the operator sees, you see. So you're working in tandem in that kind of a situation. And again, the application itself is a free application. You can download it and you can download it and utilize it and password protected. And you can set it up as read-only or read-write if you so choose. Now, a slightly different product is FactoryTalk Viewpoint. And how this works is if you're utilizing, let's say, an industrial PC with FactoryTalk Viewpoint, or using a PanaView Plus 7 product, when you develop your application, you'll go ahead and develop the screens that you want the remote operator, remote person who's monitoring the situation to see. So the screens you create for them can be entirely independent of what the local operator is seeing. And once again, you do have the ability to take control in many situations. Now, if you want the remote person to see the exact same thing, you just merely publish the screens that the local operator has, also for use the remote operator. And then we get to the truly large scale things that you can do. And in some cases, it may be large scale in terms of number of units on the plant floor, or maybe it's just large scale in terms of all the flexibility that you want to have. And that is what you can do with Thin Manager software and Thin clients. And once again, I mentioned Tom's name earlier. Tom will talk you through all these things, but you are going to be amazed by all the things you can do remotely when you start using Thin Manager.
It's absolutely right there, Joe. And one thing before we kind of look at how that enunciation happens and all of the power that we now have to port that information appropriately, we have to realize the technology is also working in our favor just with the type of information that we have access to. For us, obviously at Rockwell Automation, that starts with Logix for us. And a couple pieces to talk about from a technology standpoint is, our capability and ability to talk to devices, our own assets, instrumentation, and so forth. And those assets themselves are going through technology evolutions that allow those assets to provide a lot more information, health diagnostics than they used to. For us, it's important that we have the right the communication networks and the bandwidths, et cetera, to talk those languages. Ethernet IP has become much more prevalent in the last few years, but still having capabilities to talk over HART, Foundation Field Bus, emerging communications like MQTT, OPC-UA, but having those pathways so that you can receive and port information as necessary. And it's getting a lot more information than we used to get. An Anderson-Hauser flow meter that you see on the top there, which is a partner of ours in the instrumentation space. You could talk a flow meter on Ethernet IP having maybe 2,000 pieces of information. Now, as we know, 2,000 pieces of information is way too much to allow an operator to do their job best. So really where the value comes from is to look at how we as a value consultant create that enunciation and create a window so where that specific information contextualized to the right user provides that value. And a lot of times for us, it's the creation of what I like to call libraries. And that was a lot of times my entree into that was with some of the Plant PX process objects a few years back. And now that whole team's kind of being centralized and taking advantage of that knowledge and and actually putting the onus on Rockwell to maintain that library so that we follow the standards like ISA 100 that talk about the use of color, animation, etc. But what our goal here is to put that right context to the right user at the right time. So the graphic object, and we'll say even the look of that graphic object is important, because the beauty now is how much can you make those HMI screens reflect what you see on the plant floor. So how do valves much more look like valves and pumps much more look like pumps. But that object for us then is pre-built to open up a faceplate where that contextualization happens. So you see the default to an operator tab. So the information important to an operator would be seen here, such as to start, stop, see interlocks, permissives, etc. You also see on the top that there are tabs that would allow different users, maybe a maintenance user that needs to disable the pump, have access through that same window, so they don't have to go to a different workstation or interface to do it, but would then log into the system with their credentials and have that capability to access that ability to disable the pump per se. But it is providing that right context in the right frame to the user so that you're not overwhelming that user with information not critical to that role, but allowing them to be most effective. So that's the important piece of where the value comes. And we're also taking advantage of technology as we move to the second bullet of how the hardware itself now is much more capable, and now having automatic diagnostics, which would automatically port health diagnostic conditions and enunciate that to an alarm banner or alarm summary that you see here without any code to have to be built to maybe create a watchdog that continually looks out and says, are you okay? Are you okay? When you're not okay, you're automatically porting that. So there's removal of code, from a design efficiency standpoint, from a mean time to repair, et cetera. There are native benefits to that. So those are two important pieces about the information itself. And from a specific product standpoint on the PanelView 5000, there's an important role here from monitoring and diagnostics perspective as well, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. So you just heard Chris talk a little bit about automatic diagnostics. So, you've got the information coming in, and the question is, okay, so how do I handle that? Well, what's really nice is PanelView 5000 graphic terminals have been on the market now for several years. And the new software, version 8, that will be coming out in the next month or so, supports automatic diagnostics. So you'll automatically be able to display that information on PanelView 5000. And that's a nice advancement for many customers. Now, 5000, as I talked about earlier, also supports VNC, virtual network computing. Just some other things that you might be interested in is that, when you utilize VNC, you can download a free app to get access to VNC. Again, it's password protected, it's read write or read only. And once again, that allows you to see exactly what the operator is doing and take control if you want to. And again, that's how you want to set it up. You can also, if you'd like to, go ahead and upload and download files remotely if you'd like to do that. You can also do something that's more manual if you'd prefer, and that's simply load your files to an SD card and then be able to have a remote operator load them up into the terminal if so desired.
So Thin Manager has several ways to help with your remote monitoring and diagnostics as well. One is to reduce the overall cybersecurity footprint that exists. So, where possible, you can replace what we would say is a traditional PC with a diskless, fanless, thin client, and have a piece of hardware that's going to last a long time and can be centrally managed and poses, again, virtually no network threat at all. Of course, monitoring any of these terminals is very easy. Joe and Chris have both talked extensively about the VNC capabilities in the Rockwell portfolio. Thin Manager shares that capability as well. Thin Manager can shadow any terminal connected to the Thin Manager network from the Thin Manager console. Thin Manager can also allow any terminal to be shadowed from another terminal. So you can, as Joe explained, shadow a panel view from a thin client, or shadow a panel view from a PC, or shadow the PC to one of the thin clients. And this is all encrypted VNC communication when viewed through Thin Manager. We can send notifications to a phone number, to an email, to an SMS text message. If one of the devices does go down, they can be easily replaced in just a few minutes. Again, no local storage on your typical thin client. And so therefore the device can simply be removed, a new device replaced, and Thin Manager immediately downloads that configuration within just a couple of minutes. If you have a multi-server deployment, whether that's multi-servers on a single site or multi-servers across multiple sites, you can centrally manage the Thin server database from a central location. The Thin server database is where we store all the configurations for the devices, users, and locations that Thin Manager manages. And again, those can be managed centrally from a single location. And then finally, if you're trying to unify the wired experience for your workforce to the mobile experience, Thin Manager offers Windows, Android, and iOS mobile clients so that any of those devices can now port existing applications that you already use to those devices without rewriting any of the code.
Thanks for that, Tom. And again, through aspects that Tom's just talking about, we see that there's large benefits in technology allowing us to get information to the right person. And that power of doing such is extremely important to being productive in today's environment. Although, unfortunately, the other side of the sword is anytime you're opening pathways for information to pass, you do have to be protecting of those entryways as well, because those can be targets for hackers, cyber criminals, and not just those single offenders, but up to state-based coordinated attacks. Obviously, those threats change on a daily basis. So, and we've talked a couple times already about how sometimes that threat also is from the inside as well. But I would suggest that the value of that information passing really forces us to look at this and saying we really can't or maybe shouldn't go back to living on an island. There are some infrastructures, and obviously, as we serve the military in certain functions as well, that you do have to have appropriate air gaps as the application warrants. But, how do we tackle this, as a problem that continually changes, as technology changes and so forth? But we really feel that the biggest strength, the biggest opportunity, the biggest value that we feel we bring to play in the market is really, condensing it to how do we enable the IT and the OT functions to work together to secure the network. And Thin Manager, again, comes to play here in this convergence space, Tom.
That's right. Thanks, Chris. So as Joe and Chris have both pointed out, this is one of those things that was happening, this convergence between IT and OT was happening pre-COVID, but we've certainly seen an acceleration of this convergence over the last couple of years. So Thin Manager's take is very simple. The idea is give IT control of what IT should have control of. So in our case, IT still maintains ownership of almost every device with an IP address and every user and user group. And what Thin Manager does is sync automatically with the Active Directory that's been blessed and maintained by IT. And so now OT can use the Thin Manager console to deploy content, enable devices, and move and add users to different groups on the plant floor within their purview. So it gives each player or each team their own sandbox, but it allows them to work together in a manner, again, where IT owns what they need to own and OT owns what they need to own. We're also taking steps to solidify and have more cross functionality between our own portfolio products. So the users we mentioned earlier that Active Directory syncs with, those are called relevance users inside of Thin Manager. And we take the access groups and permissions, again, blessed by IT, and that those are synced with Thin Manager. And those permissions or whatnot are used when Thin Manager decides to pass a session through to something like FactoryTalk View SE. So when you do want to pass a session from Thin Manager to FactoryTalk View SE, we offer additional layers of multi-factor authentication if needed. So you can easily add PIN IDs, RFID badges, biometric devices, very easily with a couple of Thin Manager modules. And then finally, that single sign-on ability of the authentication pass-through, that's really what that is for. It requires version 10 plus of FactoryTalk View SE and Thin Manager, but at that point, you have your customers will have that single sign-on experience when using Thin Manager with FactoryTalk View SE.
Tom had mentioned on a previous slide about, you talk about a fundamental problem of just cybersecurity and the attacks of such. Sometimes you think of a fundamental resolution is, can you engineer the problem out? And maybe in some ways you can when you think about reducing that attack footprint. We've seen it that in a lot of locations, computing is necessary. Having an OS of some sort is definitely part of the control system in a lot of ways, but tethering that PC that perhaps was in a white box in a fixed location and tethering that through network cables, maybe not as many as this gentleman here on the screen, but then through firewalls, managed and unmanaged switches, et cetera. That's a lot of hardware and wiring that has to be maintained, that has to be protected. So in a lot of ways, can we just remove that from the equation? And the answer is yes. As those white box PCs leave and are prohibited from returning, for us, it's always been an answer that our industrial PCs and having capability of a married OS as part of the product is important. As we talk about marrying an OS to Logix, we in the last few years, we've had the 1756, the Control Logix compute module. In the last 2 years, we've also introduced a product, the Compact Logix 5480, to the market, which is a Logix controller with an onboard Windows 10 IoT Enterprise OS. We're going to talk a little bit more later in the presentation about some of the added capabilities that you take advantage of through our Edge portfolio. But in this case, just looking at reducing the attack footprint, these are definitely products and part of the solution that helps you address security on this kind of basis. PanelView 5000 also specifically here, Joe.
Yeah, when you start looking at the generations of PanelView product, you might remember the slide I put up at the beginning, kind of walked you through where we're at. PanelView 5000 is the most current generation of product. And the software used to program it, View Designer, is the most current generation of software we have. Now, why is that relevant for security? Well, you have to remember that if you have software that was developed 20 years ago and kept moving forward, when it was originally designed, it really wasn't meant to be hacker-proof for today's standards. So it kept on having to be improved and patched and improved and patched, and all those things are correct and good. But when you develop a product from scratch in recent years, it's very beneficial because you can start out with everything the best and the newest to begin with. And that's what we do with PanelView 5000. First of all, let's look at it from a security device standpoint. It's compatible with USB connected RFID devices. And so if you want to utilize automatic login like wristbands or badges, you can do that. We have a knowledge base article that explains how to do that. It has robust user administration. Each terminal can support up to 500 unique user accounts, and it has 6 different classes, plus a guest user. Now, each class can have read-write access, read-only, or you can set it up so that they don't have access to certain screens you don't want them to have access to. You can even do that for a graphic element. It also features an auto logout so that if your operator walks away, you can set it up that it goes ahead and logs them out. Now, on top of all of this, it's a non-Windows operating system. It's actually a Linux operating system. Now, just by the fact that it's non-Windows means that there are fewer hackers out there that go after this environment. And of course, we ourselves extensively tested. So for a lot of different reasons, PanelView really does deliver airtight security.
When you look at just the issues facing operator access and security and so forth, we also want to be mindful of the engineers and just in general how we serve you, our customers, from an efficiency standpoint, and knowing there's a lot of things that this pandemic has changed upon just the whole life cycle of procuring control systems. That just basically, a lot of ways, is just the life cycle itself. You think of just the semiconductor Moore's law, that technology is just obsoleting so much faster than it ever has. So just life cycles of product and support of such is much harder. And the days of set it and forget it for 20, 30 years, unfortunately, are coming to an end. How do we live in that environment? How do we continue to provide a solution that a lot of times is all encompassing, but can be customized, from a just enough and just at the right cost way? How do we serve our channel, from being a big part of that from a Rockwell standpoint, of enabling that commonality, but allowing the strengths of our partners to show as well? And how do we do this in ways where in a pandemic, we can't be face-to-face? Even for this roadshow, we realized that one of the drawbacks is typically a roadshow would be physical face-to-face, where we'd also have some product or maybe some demos to get your hands on. And we will talk about getting your hands on stuff at the end, so don't let me forget that. But at the same time, it's causing a lot of change. And I would say, some of it's good. Some of it has forced us to really look at this and how do we present this message in a virtual format. So again, it's a lot of things that put pressure and different elements of how you deliver a solution. And you may think that maybe this needs a brand new and sophisticated answer to really solve this challenge of being efficient, being a cost effective, et cetera. Well, I will challenge that it's an answer that is not new, but continues to drive the way that we go to business, and that's through our integrated architecture. Just some background on me. I cut my teeth from a control perspective with Foxborough on their DCS, the Foxborough IA system. It was version 8 at the time. And so there was a specific controller, DCS controller, to handle the process aspect of the jobs I'd work on, controlling temperature, pressure, flow, stuff that you maybe put in quotations is slow. And if we did have to access or do work on a fast speed, conveyance, packaging kind of piece, we'd be then connecting to an Allen Bradley PLC to handle that. So you start looking at that perspective conventionally of using a specific controller for each discipline. Maybe each of those controllers have their own software package that allows configuration of that discipline. Maybe that software itself has different power built into the languages. I know in Foxborough at the time, they had ladder, but the ladder didn't offer the same functionality that function block did, so there was, some drawbacks based on the programming choice. And at the end of the day, you may need a person or personnel to have specific knowledge in that specific software space that has to be managed. Contrast that, especially in times of COVID, to what we could present as an integrated architecture solution based on Logix, which in itself is scalable from compact to control as needed from a size and cost standpoint, all using the same software package, Studio 5000. So when you talk about the ability, even for me, that was maybe in lack of better terms, kind of a process weenie, but knowing how a program process very much looks the same as you would program discrete, safety, motor, batch within a Rockwell product. Full functions on all the languages. So you didn't have to, revert to a certain language to get full power. And really, again, because of the pressure that COVID and the pandemic has put on personnel, why not look at a system that can cross-train across the whole plant-wide aspect of operations to say, why do this when I can't have a system where I can minimize the different knowledge base and be able to take advantage of maybe a limited personnel to me. And those are things that we would challenge. And again, as you look through these next slides of what we've invested in the product, we really feel there's innate value and benefit to looking at Rockwell Automation as that one source for control across the board as we move forward here. And that does start with a product again as well from a PanelView 5000 standpoint, Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So when you're looking at the design side of the equation for PanelView 5000, there's a lot to love here. When you look at it from an integration viewpoint with our Logix controllers, first of all, you can browse the tags in your Logix program. There's no need to re-enter or import them. And that is a large time savings, and our customers absolutely love that. You have direct access to extended tag properties such as metadata, max-min, engineering units, all those kind of things are there. And you have flexible tools for screen development. Now, I don't know if any of you have done this in the past, but we've had a lot of customers that would, they develop an application and they develop it for 2 different size terminals. And unfortunately, it would then require them to recreate the application to save it for 2 different sizes. With this setup, you can just go ahead and automatically design it for a screen size. And as long as it's another PanelView 5000 terminal, you can resize the application to run it with that other terminal. And an extensive library of smart, capable, scalable vector graphic elements. And again, I want to say that scalable vector graphic is very important because that means they're very crisp, very nice looking graphic elements. And then finally, we had the Logix integration of alarms. So the Logix tag-based and instruction-based alarms automatically display on the PanelView 5000 with no additional configuration. Now, there's a runtime benefit to all of this that a lot of people don't know about. So let me flip my hat over for a little bit and say that I'm out on the plant floor. It's no secret that occasionally, for whatever reason, things go wrong. You might lose communication between your controller and your HMI. And the unfortunate part about that is when it occurs, the alarms that might still report from the controller get lost. You know, your HMI gets reconnected eventually, but because they weren't connected when the alarms reported, and nobody knows what's going on. If a maintenance person is trying to troubleshoot that piece of equipment, they don't know which alarm came first and for what, may not even see the alarms at all. That's not true with PanelView 5000. All of the alarms are kept track of in the controller. Now, the reason that can occur is that the current Logix platform, along with PanelView 5000, were developed simultaneously. So they were designed to work with each other with this knowledge in mind. So basically what this means is if you lose communication and that controller keeps on reporting alarms, it doesn't matter if they're not received by the PanelView 5000 because it's not connected. When it reconnects, it goes ahead and pulls the controller, and now it reports them all in the correct time-stamped order. And you want to see a maintenance person that's ready to hug you, that'll be the time. That's a great feature.
You know, I'll use that as a kind of a segue. So that aspect of alarm integration in a way is really marked, you know, critical things we had to do. So when you look at the previous slide, it talked about the integrated architecture and our push to say, why not choose us and choose a Rockwell solution, you know, across the board? Obviously, there were still developments that had to be made in the product, you know, so that we're best in class, if you will, in a lot of spaces. Part of that was you shouldn't have a spot where you'd have to create a tag and then its alarm reference would be a creation of another tag. You know, that should be done as you create the tag and then have the alarming option there, which now we do. And then, so a lot of the things in terms of that design environment that you see both in the PanelView 5000 product in the build there, but also as you go into the FactoryTalk View software as well, it's the same piece. So when you talk about being able to own the glass and being able to provide that benefit, you know, we had to remove any perceived holes or added steps or added clicks to that function, and that's been a big piece. And when you talk about what we've built to really highlight the Logix plus HMI piece, the library is a prime example of that, of saying, you know, we didn't build a library of objects that would work in ignition or Wonderware per se, that it was built to build on the power of Rockwell. And some things that I know we undersell sometimes is the aspect of keeping that context of units of operation on up. And I'll explain what I mean here. You know, you have, say, a mixer or a valve. And for those that are a little bit knowledgeable about Studio 5000, you now know that there's a logical configurator so that you could create like a mixer or a valve and associate all the programs and so forth that exist as part of that valve or mixer with that physical element of the mixer or valve. As you go up, we've talked about that the symbols that call it faceplates, you know, match that context so that you have a specific faceplate for a valve or a pump, where that information is properly contextualized still within the context of that pump. Now, if you own the glass, then you have the access to the FactoryTalk hubs into the information space. So maybe with that valve, then you have things like hysteresis or some of the things you look at from a dashboard perspective, but still within that same context of the valve. And you don't get that across the board. It just makes things more intuitive. It allows for decisions and things to be made more intuitively, which is important for us. And again, the value of such we feel is very strong, and you can tie money and time to it.
So Thin Manager helps with your design, in that we also help with your compute efficiency. So design efficiency includes compute efficiency. And so with Thin Manager 12, and 12.1 was just released back in July, we have our new Docker host container manager, which allows you to create an application container, in this case for web-based clients. So Thin Manager can now deliver a web-based application directly from the Thin Manager console. So previously this required an RDS connection, and now that is no longer necessary. It comes direct from Thin Manager. The easiest way to understand this container technology is it's very similar to VMware, in that you virtualize what it is you're wanting to deliver. In this case, it's only virtualizing an application. And the beauty here is traditionally we would only host these images on a traditional Windows server, but now the web host container can be hosted on a regular Linux server, a Windows server that can be configured to host Linux containers. And the best part is you can even host this on one of your VersaView clients. That's right, the actual thin client hardware can be used as a host. So in addition to the great value you get purchasing the VersaView hardware as a client device that lasts a long time and can be centrally managed, now you can actually take advantage of some of the extra compute left on that device during normal use to launch web applications. Next slide, please. So the logical output for this would be after you've installed a state-of-the-art visualization system like we've described to you today, maybe the next logical step is dashboarding so that you can monitor and review the numbers, right, from your new process. And so all the items in the Rockwell portfolio that are web-based applications can now be easily delivered with Thin Manager using this web browser container technology. We've even restored support for Citrix in this case. So if there are IT applications that need to be supported through Citrix, that is now again a possibility. And again, the big news here is that your investment in the VersaView series hardware goes even further because you can host this web technology directly from those devices themselves.
Very powerful there, Tom. Thank you. And as we kind of transition a little bit now to what we are considering as part of this presentation, the human side, I think we look at the impact on all workers in terms of distancing and securing and making hygienic those areas to work. But we're also at the same time fighting a generational problem as well in terms of seasoned workers retiring and really the next generation coming into play, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think what we're trying to do here is just show you some mathematical proof of some of the trends that we talked about earlier. You know, there's more than 10,000 Americans that turn 65 every day. And by 2024, that's projected to increase to more than 12,000. And in 2020, partially due to COVID, baby boomers retired at twice the rate they had in 2019. And so some of you folks out there that know me know that, you know, I'm going to be one of these statistics pretty soon. I'm fastly going towards retirement. So these are real numbers. These are real things going on. And, you know, what's the result of all this? Well, look at this final circle here. The U.S. shortage of skilled manufacturing workers exceeded 600,000 before COVID, and it's projected to be 2.4 million by 2028. So the point here is the shortage is not going down, it's going up. The translation into all of this is we as a company need to do better things with our products to create better solutions to help everybody out on the plant floor. And that's what we're trying to do. And as an example of that, I'll come back to PanelView 5000. So let's take for a minute the notion that we have a lot of folks that are getting on in their years and they're retiring. So basically what that means is we have a younger and younger workforce. Well, that also means that we want to have products that appeal to that workforce that they're going to look at intuitively, know how to work with. If you look at that left-hand circle, you'll see that there's sort of a rectangular button. That's an image of the bottom bezel on a PanelView 5000 product. The point behind it is that's a navigation button. And if you think about it, that's very similar to what you'd find on a cell phone or on a tablet. Again, the generation today knows how to work with cell phones, they know how to work with tablets. They expect that they push that button and up will come a navigation screen. That's exactly what happens on PanelView 5000. You can push that button, your navigation screen comes up, you can navigate around the terminal. So it's fast and easy, it's intuitive. And it also means that when you start developing applications, you don't have to put individual buttons on the bottom of every single screen and take up all that real estate. Now in the center picture, you'll see, again, we've been talking about this a little bit, a pump looks like a pump and a valve looks like a valve. The graphics on a 5000 are great. And once again, when you start talking about the younger generation workforce, you know, the thing that they're going to talk to you about when you start providing products to them and they start looking at graphics is they want to see things that look real. They don't want to see things that look cryptic. So that's what this is all about with the new graphic elements that we have. And there's also all sorts of other information that can be gathered on the PanelView 5000. And of course, we have a PDF viewer. There's a couple of other things we'll talk about in just a few minutes.
So Thin Manager serves that changing workforce. And a couple of things we've noticed over the last few years, again, accelerated by COVID, is that the workforce is getting younger and it's getting smaller. The younger workforce, of course, has the demands that we're probably all familiar with. If you're going to have multiple applications, why wouldn't you have multi-monitors? That's something that again, it's a normality for a younger worker. Easy access to information, as Joe was just pointing out, the ability to hit a button to find something versus having to search through some sort of arcane process. They don't expect that things are going to be like the old Dewey Decimal System. They're expecting modern. Switching between applications or simply screen sharing, right? This is what a lot of apps, again, on their personal devices already allow them to do. And those expectations only translate to the factory floor. And then, of course, the younger age workers or the smaller teams that are being created, our shadowing feature, which I know we've mentioned many times, but it is a very powerful, secure feature for sharing that information on the plant floor and monitoring the plant floor from any location on the plant floor. And then finally, that easy mobility solution where you can take existing applications, and if they need to go mobile, you can port it to just about any kind of mobile device with an easy Thin Manager application. And that application is then available on the mobile device exactly as it appears and functions on your traditional workstation. Therefore, your training and implementation time is greatly reduced.
Hey, Tom, since we've got you here and you
Sure.
mentioned shadowing, when Thin Manager first became a part of Rockwell, I remember talking with the guys there and I heard that term shadowing, and I kind of knew what it meant and I kind of didn't. And then, when I found out how powerful it was and all the products that could be tied into it, can you just say a few words about what shadowing exactly is?
Sure. So shadowing is taking advantage of that secure VNC server that Joe was talking about in the panel views earlier. That exists in several of the portfolio products, and it's enabled inside of Thin Manager. And so what we do is simply access that virtual network connection. And in the case of Thin Manager, we're encrypting that connection. And these shadows are real shadow. The reason we use the term shadow is it's not a typical shadow session. Historically, a shadow would be what the server understands a session to be doing, whereas the shadow that we do with VNC on all of our products is actually showing you what's happening on that screen that operator's on. So the session in the thin client world, right, that session's actually happening on a server somewhere. And really, you're not concerned with what the server's doing. You're concerned with what the operator sees and what the operator understands. And so, again, our shadowing capability is secure and encrypted, but it moves between any of the devices, taking advantage, again, of that built-in VNC capability that's built into just about every Rockwell device in the current portfolio.
Extremely powerful there, Thomas, especially as things like biometrics and being able to use location and beacons to make sure that the content is deployed effectively but safely as well in that space.
That's correct, Chris. You can lock down our tablets to locations if necessary. It is an extra step and requires a few extra configurations to take place, but it is an easy process. So just to move to mobility makes it very easy. To add locations as a secondary step, but just as easy as the first step.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom. And I think if we looked at mobility as maybe one of the languages spoken by the operators of today, what is the language of the engineers of today? Well, it's a lot of times not ladder and function block. It's things like Python and JSON and Java and C++. And the reason for bringing this up is a option of our Edge portfolio, and specifically the 1756, the ControlLogix compute module. What it does in talking to the controller is that it sits in the same chassis. There's an API built into the compute module that interrogates the Logix processor to have access to the logic. So what you have is a way where you could kind of have a PC or a computing capability that could reside along with Logix to create maybe a unique control algorithm per se, or maybe attach something like MATLAB to some of the computing function that will be done with closing a loop in logic. Why that's important in this case is, let's just start with C++. And as the graduating engineers are now versed in those type of coding strategies, how do we take advantage of those skill sets? Now, by using that API, you could have a realm where you're building some kind of code outside in C++ that could work alongside control within Logix to create a unique control algorithm. And because we do work with a company, Keep Systems, that has built a translator tool from C++ to Python, Java, and back and forth, you have that capability to take advantage of those modern coding strategies that the graduating classes are coming out with, and taking advantage of those skill sets for control. Obviously, in certain ways to add and enhance to the ladder of function block and structured text that you have access to today. And so that's, again, how do we distill value and make control more of an attractive space for that next generation workforce as well. Again, if we look at that next generation, regardless of its baby boomers or the Gen Xers, Gen Yers, et cetera, we know that COVID's had an impact across the board. And as we've said before, we do our best work when we feel safe. Feeling safe in these times means that are you socially distant? Are you working in a place where it can be, cleaned down, hygienically prepared for the next user, et cetera? How is sterilization done for those cases? These are, kind of, specific, maybe when you think of just COVID and that approach, or maybe sometimes the easiest things to think about that have an impact on the life of an operator here. So, what are some things that we do in this space? And I would challenge again that when you look at our portfolio in this space, Joe, when it comes to being able to space out, plus have ways where you can wash down some of these terminals, it's an important piece to talk about.
Yeah, so, when you start looking at everything that we've gone over in this presentation so far, there's been a lot of talk about software and all the different things we can do with Thin Manager and View Designer and Factory Talk View to help our customers out. Well, there's also things we can do with the hardware itself, and that's what this is all about. So with the panel view products, maybe it was about 3/4 of a year to a year before the start of COVID, we brought out our first stainless steel terminal. It's a stainless steel panel view +7 product. And this actually has an IP69K rating. Let me say that again, IP69K. That's high pressure, high temperature washdown. And it's extremely good for these washdown environments where people are concerned with COVID. Very popular now in the food and beverage market, very popular in the pharmaceutical market. Now, these also carry a National Sanitary Foundation certification. Not only does the terminal carry that certification, it actually has a blue replaceable food grade gasket, and the gasket even by itself is NSF certified. So it's a great product. We're also bringing out a PanelView 5510 version of this product this year, and we've already got on the market, just brought it out, a 12-inch version of this for the new VersaView 6300 family. And we'll continue to expand this as we go. So very good for this environment that we're in. Now, we also know that today we keep hearing this space 6 feet apart, space 6 feet apart. So how do you handle that? Well, we have a couple of different solutions for you there. One of them is in the octagon, second from the left, you'll see a terminal with a cable on it. That is a mobile view. And basically that is an industrial PC with Factory Talk View software on it that runs panel view type of applications on it. So for all practical purposes, you can run your panel view +7 applications on it. So you can move around with that. It has a long cable on it. You can unplug it, plug it into a different junction box if you like. A lot of different things you can do. But the point is, from the perspective of COVID, it allows your operator to maintain his or her distance from the next operator. Then we've got the on-machine products. That's the product with the handles that you see in front of you. Those products can be mounted to a pendant or swing arm and can be moved back and forth on that swing arm to easily give you 6 feet or more separation. And finally, you may have some areas where you don't want an operator to go at all, but you want to be able to see what's going on. So with the upcoming version 8 software for PanelView 5510, you'll be able to plug in an IP camera and be able to see into those areas where you don't want your operators to go.
So several ways that Thin Manager has stepped up to help our customers with the challenges that are current to their situation. The ability to quickly redeploy terminals and without having to reconfigure them. So the Thin Manager, we have several customers have centralized control rooms, and social distancing requirements perhaps couldn't be met in some of those control rooms. So they actually needed to divide the control room up into separate rooms. They were easily able to move their clients around to different areas. And as long as it's on the same network, those clients would still boot up, still have access to the same IP camera views, still have access to the same shadows, still have access to all the same data and content that they had before they were physically moved. Of course, there's several other things that that Thin Manager offers that help. We've talked again extensively today about the shadowing feature between the products. Another thing to consider is the ability to assign content to a user. So if your location does have to change geographically, or things have to be rearranged on the plant floor, by having content assigned to a person based on their role allows that content that belongs to them to follow them no matter what terminal, even a mobile terminal, that they authenticate to on the Thin Manager network. And then finally, the ability to deploy quick messaging and things like that across the Thin Manager network can help with changing situations on the fly, just to send notifications to team members to let them know that something's up or something's down or something needs to be attended to.
That's very important, Tom. I think when you look at that flexibility of offering unique solutions, either taking advantage of technology that's in place already and refactoring it, et cetera, makes me really appreciate and think of some of, when we first became partnered together as part of Rockwell, what Thin Manager offered as a new way to even think of how networks were put together, Tom, and the benefit that Thin Manager provides here.
That's right. Thanks for that, Chris. So the area we'll be looking at here is right here in the middle of the slide that you're looking at. And in the traditional automation network, these would have been what we call white box PCs, perhaps a traditional PC with a monitor, a local operating system, a handful of applications, perhaps, including antivirus software, moving parts like fans and hard drives, and then finally storage, access to mass storage devices. And all these things take time, open up loopholes in the network, and have to be maintained. Someone has to maintain this across the entire network. So however many of those devices you have, that's how many OSs and everything you're going to be managing. So the idea behind Thin Manager is simple. We take advantage of a modern technology like virtualization, and we consolidate a lot of those images down in just a few manageable server images. And again, this goes where IT does their best work, right? They manage those servers and that central connection. And then OT can use the Thin Manager console to redeploy all of that content that's much more easy to manage now to Subversive View end devices. Maybe they do need to push some content to PCs. Maybe some mobile devices need to be thrown in. But the idea is that once Thin Manager is installed, moving and changing how applications are delivered and where they appear and who has access to them is all managed centrally and all managed very easily from a central console. Next slide, please. And the final thought we want to leave you with is that managed thin clients are the best thin clients. Thin client hardware alone, as we've talked about today, really doesn't do much of anything because it doesn't have a hard drive and it doesn't have that local OS installed. And that's what makes them great. That's what gives them a longer shelf life. That's what makes them centrally manageable. But they do have to be managed. So some of the things like no local storage and all that is based on the device, but a lot of the functionality you heard about today comes when you plug this hardware into a portfolio of products like Rockwell Automation offers their customers.
Exactly right, Tom. So when you talk about the flexibility, I mean, flexible hardware solutions may sound like an oxymoron, but when you look at this and you add in the Compact Logix 5480, which is at the top left, and the compute module in the top right, the beauty of this portfolio that we're talking about today is many. We talk about the fact of reducing the target footprint in cases, being able to really position a solution by marrying the right software with the right hardware as a solution. Things that we're doing with the Compact Logix 5480, an example of which is right now providing that product with an onboard version of the FactoryTalk Edge Gateway, which would allow with 500 tags to be able to talk to OPC-UA, for example. So being able to marry that appropriately as a solution is very important. The ability to take advantage from a security perspective, not only the Windows 10 IoT Enterprise, which was developed in partnership with Rockwell and Microsoft to a point, of looking at an industrial hardened OS, an OS that doesn't need to really connect for updates in a 10-year period. And in certain cases, as we saw in the panel view, that maybe you remove Windows altogether and take advantage of Linux in certain cases. So that's a lot of capability we drive here. And again, as we look at serving the customers out there, whether end users or OEMs, sometimes it's the footprint size and being able to match that appropriately where needed is very important. And again, there is benefits by just even, we said reducing the attack footprint by getting rid of the architecture in between Logix and the PC, but you also take advantage of faster information flow when you put that OS or that PC capability closer to Logix. That shows itself in maybe a use case that we found working with a partner that does a vision system for anomaly detection. And basically they're using a camera on top of a conveyance line, and the camera is looking as material passes through, perhaps any changes in depth or things like that that may signify a problem. And that's happening really fast. And they took advantage of that speed of the edge devices to give them the right power to take care of that. And so you talk about that with the appropriate bundling as a solution. There are a lot of options out there that again, it's not that we're showing a lot of options out there or necessarily that it's a technology play. The beauty here is we're starting to get value on the unique use cases and the value that's brought by taking advantage of the technology. And that's why we continue to invest in this. We're seeing a lot of unique use cases that are really benefiting by the technology here for sure. We're getting really close to the end of our formal presentation here, and it looks like we'll have a lot of good time to take some questions as you have them. Before we do so, let's kind of look explicitly at some of the recent product launches on the visualization side and what we have coming up near term, Joe.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. So in 2020, Rockwell acquired a company called Awesome. Awesome is a manufacturer of industrial PCs, and they're located in Italy. And it has been a wonderful addition to Rockwell, much like the addition of Thin Manager. So in 2020, we brought out our first offerings. As we roll these into the Rockwell portfolio, they're called the VersaView 6300, as we had mentioned several times earlier today. So the early products that we brought into the fold were box PCs, and we brought in some wall mount units, some book mount units, and some panel PCs. Now, as we rolled into the 2021 calendar year, we expanded upon all of these offerings. And Chris, if we can, there we go. So in 2021, we again added lots of different variations. We just brought out the VersaView 6300P with the stainless steel bezel. That's that stainless steel hygienic unit that we talked about. We're in the process of bringing out a long distance option for our monitors. Some on-machine units will come out towards the end of the year and in early 2022. We have more thin clients coming out, dual display unit and a whole line of monitors, and just a whole lot of variations. So right now in the 6300 family, and we brought Awesome into the Rockwell portfolio, it's about 15 months now, 16 months, something like that. We've brought in about 3,000 catalog numbers. Well, we anticipate that somewhere between the end of the calendar year and the beginning of 2022, it's going to grow to about 100,000 catalog numbers. So just a tremendous amount of variation. And the point behind this is you as a customer, often wants to get a product that is configured the way you want it. Maybe you want it with a UPS on it. Maybe you want a certain hard drive or some other configuration. We'll be able to do a wide range of those things that you desire. So just a quick look at some of the products that we've already brought in. First of all, the 6300 family features dual boot technology. And again, this is for every PC that we brought in to date from Awesome, now called VersaView 6300. All of them feature dual boot technology. Now, by dual boot technology, I mean that you can boot these products, boot them up as you normally would, and utilize them to run any kind of normal PC third-party application or run a Rockwell application for that matter. Same as you would with any other PC. But the magic is you can also boot these up and utilize these with Thin Manager software and run them as a thin client. So that means that you can do some really unique things with these. Let's say that you're an OEM, and perhaps you build standalone pieces of equipment where you normally would use a PC, but you're shipping your equipment into a plant where they want to use Thin Manager software and utilize thin clients. Well, you can go ahead and ship your equipment and run it on a local application. When it hits the plant floor and they're ready at the end user level, they can go ahead and utilize the existing PC as a thin client. So it gives that dual purpose. Now, that also means that you can do some unique things with respect to running both a local application and utilizing it as a thin client. So you could boot it up run it as a PC, and then also utilize it as a thin client to deliver content from your server if you so like. It's just a huge amount of different types of things that you can do. Maybe what you want to do is run the application locally and then utilize the thin client part up as a backup in case you have a problem, or you want to do it in reverse. You want to run it off the server, and if you have a problem and you lose communication, then you just go ahead and run it as basically a local application off of that PC. So lots of different things that you can do with this. So the version you just saw was an Atom class unit. It's also available strictly as a thin client, and Tom talked a lot about those. We have an upscale version of this with i3, i5, or i7 dual quad-core processor. Now, these also feature jumbo frame and wake online functionality. For when you're looking for the opportunity to run something that might be a medium to high performance kind of application, you need that level of hardware, this is the product that you want to take a look at. And we also have a version available where it's a little bit larger footprint, more simplified box. And the point behind this is to bring these in at a little bit lower price point when you don't have any constraints on space and you don't think that you're going to change the product configuration in the future. And then we have the panel PC versions of this. So these are available in a little over 12 inches up to 24 inches in standard and widescreen. These are available both in analog resistive single touch design and projective capacitive multi-touch design. So wide range of products that are available. And if you move one slide forward, there's a wide range of different bezels that are available. Some of these are still coming out. Today we have a lot of the aluminum ones out with the analog resistive design and then the one projective capacitive. In the next couple of months, you'll see an increased range available. As I mentioned, we just did bring in one of the 12-inch hygienic stainless steel versions in IP69K. There'll be other sizes coming out a little bit later on this year. There'll be a slightly different design in stainless steel in IP66. So just a wide variation. And then they'll also be available in matching monitors in the event that you want to buy that product, but you don't want the PC on the back end, you just want it as a monitor. Toward the end of the calendar year and going into 2022, you'll see a wide range of on-machine products. This is both monitors and PCs. So they'll be available with push buttons and without push buttons if you so desire. The idea behind this is you're buying a product that has a fully enclosed back end, can mount to a swing arm. Again, we talked about that being able to move back and forth to keep your operator separated. If you order it as a stainless steel product without push buttons, it'll go all the way up to IP69K. The rest of the units will all be available as IP65. And they'll be available in 15.6 up to 21.5 inches wide. So pretty good range of these as well.
Thanks for that, Joe. And this is the end of the formal part of our presentation, but we hope that that this focus doesn't end here. And when I say that, maybe there was something that you saw today that you could take advantage of, maybe something unique that you're facing dealing with COVID. We'd like to be able to offer assistance moving forward. Obviously, in context with From and your local touch point to get to From and Rockwell. Again, since we're not there in person, there are ways you can get your hands on some of the things we've shown through, downloading of Thin Manager and downloading some of the labs to get your hands on it. The View Designer software, if you have Studio 5000, and so if you have that Logix, you already have View Designer to take advantage of. If maybe you have that already and you can use it and get your hands on it. And then there's a lot of work that we've done to our website, a lot of things to highlight the value of our latest technology and ways that you can evaluate the edge compute offering we've talked about as well. But let us stop talking and let us be open for any questions from the team as you have them. And I don't see much either in the Q&A or chat at this point, but please don't hesitate to jump in and ask a question if you have them.